Today we're talking about Yoshinobu Yamamoto's pitching. Even I couldn't stop grinning all day after watching this performance. At Dodger Stadium, players wore special uniforms commemorating the 250th anniversary of Independence Day, and the star of the game was, of course, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He had a tough start, allowing runners on base in the first inning, but struck out batters at crucial moments to escape the jam. And from there, he completely found his rhythm. Starting in the second inning, he pitched a no-hitter, shutting down hitters one after another, and ultimately went 7 innings, allowing just 3 hits and no runs, with the most strikeouts in the majors that day, a truly magnificent performance. Shohei Ohtani started on the bench due to a strain in his right arm, so with the team's usual ace absent, Yamamoto single-handedly carried the club. The Dodgers won, and the stadium was filled with excited cheers the whole way through. Fans couldn't stop talking about it afterward, marveling at how someone so much smaller than the other pitchers in the league could produce a performance like that, noting that the Padres had been reading pitches just fine the day before but had nothing today, and wondering aloud whether this was the most technically gifted arm in all of baseball. The entire stadium seemed to buzz with his name that night. The first big reaction came from a Hall of Fame flamethrower, who appeared on a local sports program to break down what he just watched, opening with mock exasperation that a pitcher of Yamamoto's height could throw with that kind of power, joking that if he kept it up, nobody would stand a chance against him. He admitted he'd genuinely been nervous heading into the game, since the team's other starter had been hit hard the day before, and he figured the Padres would come in with a plan. And he half-joked that his cat purring on his lap before first pitch had helped calm his nerves. But watching the no-hit stretch from the second inning onward, he called it simply abnormal, saying that as far as he knew there wasn't another arm in the league capable of pitching that cleanly, and that Yamamoto represented a completely different type of pitcher from the era's radar gun stars who were throwing triple-digit fastballs that, in his view, simply couldn't be sustained without eventually blowing out an arm. Yamamoto, by contrast, wasn't flashy at all, but was instead a craftsman who got strikeouts almost naturally, and he compared him to another similarly unflashy, similarly effective starter elsewhere in the league, someone without the velocity but with the same knack for simply winning. At only 27 years old, already pitching at that level, he called it genuinely impressive. On command, he pointed out that nearly every pitch was landing for strikes, meaning Yamamoto was actually challenging hitters in the zone rather than nibbling, which he said was excellent both psychologically and technically, especially against a Padres team notorious for its scouting, since adjusting his sequencing mid-game from the second inning onward showed real intelligence as well as talent. He floated Yamamoto as a legitimate Cy Young contender given the consistency, joked about being able to hear the Padres' best hitters silently cursing an unhittable curveball, and pointed to last year's World Series run as a preview of how much higher the ceiling might still go, singling out the splitter in particular as sharper than it had been earlier in the season. He also praised the Dodgers lineup for manufacturing offense of its own that day, with good situational hitting and runners coming around to score at the right moments, calling it proof of just how deep and resilient the team was despite dealing with injuries. Reflecting on the whole outing, he described a shaky first inning. A hard-hit ball survived in the second that seemed to flip a switch, and from there, precise and varied pitch placement that looked almost artistic, noting how frustrated the batters who struck out looked afterward, as if they knew they'd been completely outmaneuvered. He praised the chemistry with the catcher, mentioning that their throwing drills in the dugout had become something of a talking point for how much attention to detail it revealed. He also noted that the Padres had now lost 8 straight and remained winless at home during that stretch, failing 2 replay challenges in this game alone, calling it a rough patch for the club, and closed by pointing to a full count forced by a pitch clock violation late in the game that Yamamoto worked out of by calmly striking out the batter anyway, which he called proof of mental toughness as much as skill. adding that a second consecutive All-Star selection made it a day fitting of a true ace. Next, a legendary undersized ace known throughout his career for beating hitters with guile rather than velocity called into a radio show, and said watching Yamamoto pitch took him right back to his own playing days, since he hadn't been a big man either and had never relied purely on velocity to get outs, which was exactly why this performance meant something extra to him. Standing barely over 5'7" himself during his career, he said he had spent his whole time in the league trying to prove that body size simply didn't determine whether you could get hitters out, and watching Yamamoto reaffirmed that completely for him. He said the part of the matchup that had worried him most beforehand was the short turnaround facing the same opponent twice in close succession, calling that scenario genuinely frightening for a pitcher, since any hitter faced once will come back sharper and more focused the second time. But Yamamoto had completely reshuffled his pitch selection for this start, deliberately suppressing the pitches he had leaned on in the previous outing, and building his entire approach around a different mix, which he called a sophisticated tactic that plays directly on a hitter's memory, and something he said he had valued enormously during his own career. He singled out the splitter as especially nasty, dropping away right as hitters tried to time it, and admitted that even his own signature changeup, the pitch that had defined his career, probably wasn't thrown with that level of precision. What impressed him most of all was the reproducibility, the ability to throw the same pitch to the same spot over and over again, which he said was the one quality that truly separates elite pitchers from everyone else. He also brought up the pitch clock violation that put Yamamoto in a tough spot late in the game, nodding that his own era never had to deal with that kind of rule, which he saw as making things genuinely harder for pitchers today. And he said that Yamamoto responding by calmly striking out the very next batter without any visible frustration was proof of real mental strength, admitting that in the same spot he might have let his irritation affect his next pitch. With Ohtani out of the lineup that day, he said the absence should have been a major blow to the team, but the moment Yamamoto took the mound, you could feel the entire dugout's energy shift even through the broadcast, and that being able to steady a team like that in a moment of need was exactly what being a true ace meant. He compared it to pitching through the toughest stretches of his own career, when the pressure of the moment weighed heavier than any statistic, and said Yamamoto looked like someone who genuinely enjoyed that pressure rather than being crushed by it, which he called remarkable. Closing out, he said there was no telling how many more years of this kind of pitching lay ahead given how young Yamamoto still was, and that he himself had never once used his own size as an excuse during his career. Hopping Yamamoto would carry that same pride forward for years to come. After that, a big, physically dominant workhorse starter, a pitcher built almost in complete opposition to Yamamoto, joined a podcast and said that being on the larger side himself made him the exact opposite type of pitcher, which was precisely why Yamamoto's approach amazed him every time he watched it, since without the physical advantage to fall back on, everything about his game came down to intellect and technique. Where his own career had been defined by high pitch counts from simply overpowering hitters, he said he wished he could go back and show his younger self the kind of pitch-efficient outing Yamamoto had just thrown over 7 innings. He pointed specifically to Yamamoto's command not deteriorating late in games, something he said he had personally struggled with as fatigue set in, and his own mechanics would break down under tiredness. Allowing only 2 base runners through 7 innings, he said, wasn't really a matter of stamina at all, but proof that technique was compensating for fatigue, since in his own era, tiring pitchers usually started muscling pitches and leaving the ball up in the zone, whereas Yamamoto kept locating low in the zone even in tiring innings, which he said requires extremely efficient use of the lower half and the body as a whole. He got personal and reflective at that point, admitting he had real regrets about not taking care of his body more seriously during his playing days, having assumed in his youth that he was invincible and living however he pleased, only to have his body begin to break down later on, and said watching a player as young as Yamamoto, already working closely with a dedicated performance trainer, made him a little envious, since he believed players who started that kind of care earlier in their careers tended to last far longer. He brought up the pitch clock violation as well, this time from the perspective of a bigger-bodied pitcher whose motion naturally took longer to execute, saying the rule had genuinely worked against pitchers like him late in his own career, and that watching Yamamoto stay completely locked in with no change in expression after an unfavorable call was the kind of discipline he wished he'd had himself. On the relationship with his manager, he pointed to the post-game hug shared after coming out of the game as a sign of how deeply the team trusted him, saying that in his own career, feeling that kind of trust from a manager and teammates was part of what allowed him to keep pitching as long as he did. He closed by saying that he himself had built his career on size and raw power, while Yamamoto was proving there was an entirely different path to the same results, one that could serve as a blueprint for any young pitcher regardless of build. And he said he simply hoped Yamamoto could stay healthy and keep pitching this way for a long time to come. Finally, a legendary designated hitter, one of the most feared bats of his generation, joined a radio show to offer the hitter's perspective, saying that after a career spent entirely in the batter's box, he wanted to talk about Yamamoto specifically from that vantage point, and that simply imagining standing in against that kind of stuff gave him chills, since there hadn't been many pitchers in his playing days capable of keeping hitters that thoroughly off balance. The scariest part, in his view, was that Yamamoto wasn't nibbling at all, but was attacking the very edges of the strike zone with real conviction, meaning a hitter who took the pitch was getting called for a strike, and a hitter who swung was often missing entirely, which left no comfortable option and was exactly what demoralizes a hitter completely. He admitted that even with his own reputation for elite plate discipline, he doubted that skill would have held up against this kind of approach, since living on the edges of the zone the way Yamamoto did essentially took away a hitter's ability to simply wait him out. Crucially, he noted that approach hadn't changed even against the Padres' best power hitters, which he called the truly frightening part, since most pitchers instinctively grow a little more cautious facing a dangerous hitter, whereas Yamamoto attacked everyone with the same conviction regardless of who was standing in the box. A consistency, he said, simply couldn't come from anything but supreme confidence, since any hesitation at all is something hitters can always sense and exploit. And he said Yamamoto's pitches that day carried no hesitation whatsoever. He drew a personal parallel back to his own playing days, recalling a small, dominant ace on his own team whose starts used to visibly change the atmosphere in the opposing dugout, and said the tension he saw in the Padres' dugout while Yamamoto was on the mound reminded him of exactly that same feeling. On the flip side, he remembered how those starts actually relaxed his own team's hitters, letting them step into the box with a sense that they simply weren't losing that day. And he said great aces create exactly that same feeling for their own teammates, something that has nothing to do with size and everything to do with the presence a pitcher carries on the mound. With Ohtani sidelined that day, he said the absence should have looked like an opening for the opposing lineup, but Yamamoto's presence on the mound took even that opportunity away entirely, and that if he had been a Padres hitter that day, it simply would have been a miserable afternoon. He also praised a big home run hit by a Dodgers teammate that game, saying that as impressive as it was, the real story of the day was clearly Yamamoto, and that as a hitter who had once been on a team facing a similarly dominant pitching performance from the other side, he knew exactly how much a single big swing means to teammates when the rest of the lineup is being completely shut down. Closing out, he said that, after a long career facing all kinds of pitchers, if he ever made a list of arms he would least want to face, Yamamoto at this point in his career would rank right near the top, and that producing this level of refined, complete pitching at such a young age was honestly a little frightening for the rest of the league to think about going forward. He said he was grateful he never had to face him as a hitter himself, and that as a fan now, he was genuinely looking forward to watching him keep doing this for years to come. So that's how four completely different voices, from four different eras and four different styles of the game, all arrived at the same conclusion after watching one remarkable start. What did you think of it all? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.